Shadow of the Valley by Maggot Moshpit, Chapter 23. Flossu strode tall in front of the procession, little Yez on his shoulder. Behind them marched half a dozen farmers concerned about their crops and herds. Not a weapon was carried. Yez pointed to a group of Laxar.
They were just past there! They were looking pretty hungry, too.
Flossu chuckled.
Okay, little one.
It's true! Look!
They stopped. Flossu strained his eyes, trying to determine what the splotches on the hill were. Kethresh stayed low, carefully watching the figures moving towards her. When they stopped, she slowly slunk down the hill and out of sight. Confident she couldn't be seen, she stood and turned around, only to come face to face with a dozen bow-wielding escapees. Kull stepped forward.
Shh!
Kull shrugged and whispered in the most exaggerated whisper she could.
We brought some bows.
Some of the archers chuckled. Civi noticed the serious expression on Kethresh's face.
Hey, what's wrong?
There are people, that's what.
People? What do you mean?
Kull elbowed him.
People can mean only one thing, dear.
Right. Are they friendly?
Kethresh turned.
That's what I intend to find out. Put away your bows, but keep them close to paw. Let's greet them properly.
Kethresh marched confidently up the hill. Kull followed.
Don't just stand there. Come on.
Flossu shook his head.
I saw something, but... wait.
Even Elder Laurel saw her, and his eyes were terrible. She marched with such confidence, Flossu smiled in recognition of her sure-footedness. Here was a woman who commanded respect.
You were right.
Yez growled.
Of course I was right!
Some of the farmers muttered amongst themselves.
Who is she?
Do you think she's dangerous?
Look, there's more.
Flossu's smile wavered, as more figures also moved over the hill. Their numbers were equal to his own. There was total silence in the minute that followed, and as the woman drew closer, he noted certain physical characteristics she had. Not her attractiveness, though he did find himself attracted to her the moment he got a good look. But some of her features were different than what he was used to. For one thing, her fur was much yellower than anyone he'd ever seen, and her muzzle was much longer. In fact, as her companions drew close, he noted a wide variety of shapes and colors. He dismissed this and prepared himself for their meeting. Elder Laurel didn't seem the least bit fazed, while the other farmers took little notice. Kethresh stopped 6 feet from Flossu. Kull poked from around her back.
They're felines.
A couple of the freed slaves notched arrows. Kethresh held out her paw.
Stay your bows.
They muttered among themselves, but kept their bows notched. They did not raise them, however.
Miss, they're felines. They might be our pursuers.
I doubt that.
Kethresh cleared her throat, but Flossu spoke first.
Good morning. My name is Flossu, and this is our leader, Elder Laurel. No need to point those. We mean you no harm.
Yez growled.
Yeah! And those are our Laxar! Paws off!
Kethresh smiled, but the people behind her shrank back slightly.
Is that so? I'm Kethresh, and we should probably stop stealing your fruit as well.
Indeed.
Civi had a bow at the ready, but was shaking. He hadn't said a word. Flossu turned his sea-green eyes towards him.
What's wrong? I know I may be a little intimidating, but I assure you I'm a gentle giant.
He took a step towards Civi, who drew the bow fully and aimed it at Flossu's chest.
Stand back, feline! Don't come any closer!
Kethresh grabbed Civi's arm and shook him.
What the hell?
Civi looked confused and scared enough for 3 people.
But he's feline!
I don't care if he's a pile of dirt with eyes. He's done nothing against us.
Kull gulped.
Civi, drop the bow.
But...
Drop it.
Civi sighed and let the bow fall to the ground.
Beal's not gonna like this.
Flossu was very confused at this point, and he asked something that caught everyone off guard.
Excuse me a moment, but what's a feline?
Miri was back in her shell, sewing away. Despite this, Troy sat next to her, talking in soothing tones. That early in the morning, there was a higher demand for kitchen staff, so most of the slaves were in the kitchen. One other slave was in the room, a young girl who didn't look old enough to fully understand her own captivity. She was a good seamstress nonetheless. In a moment, she stood, walked to the door, had a quick word with the guard, and left with her. As soon as they were alone, Troy placed her paw on Miri's arm.
Miri, you don't have to respond, but I did what you asked. My father, he's going to burn the Regent's buildings, one after another.
Miri showed no sign of acknowledgement. Troy continued.
That fire in the warehouse, that wasn't him, but the one last night was. In the shack where they keep their completed weapons. I heard the fire was so hot, most couldn't be salvaged. That ought to deal a blow, huh?
Once again, silence. Troy patted her arm.
You're welcome, Miri.
Deeper in the fort, the regent was once again poring over documents in his room. He was swamped with work and making little headway. His shoulder ached considerably, and he was finding it hard to concentrate as a result. Not to mention the fact it was turning a concerning color. He sighed and decided to take care of something he'd been meaning to do for a long time. He called for the guard outside the door.
Bring me the highest-ranking officer on duty.
The guard nodded. Soon the feline that had been investigating the suspicious fires walked in.
Sir, the fires.
Yeah, shut up. That's not why I called you here.
Then why, sir?
I need you to get some runners together and find my trackers. I heard they joined up with some of Stonewall's men, but beyond that I have no idea where they disappeared to. I still want that blacksmith's head.
Sir, do you believe that wise? The public?
I don't care! Get going, I don't like to be kept waiting.
The man bowed and left with a flourish. As he closed the chamber door, he pulled the guard aside.
When the Regent's mood has improved, I want you to tell him this. Those fires were no accident. The two that happened one day apart, and only in buildings that were uninhabited and full of things that belonged to us. I think we have a resistance movement of some sort.
The guard nodded, then gulped.
The Regent won't like that news.
Shush and do as I say.
Aye, sir!
He swirled his cloak and walked quickly down the corridor. Indeed, there was land. Ziff and Zik gazed off into the horizon stoically, examining the thin strip of gray. It was probably very close to the capital. Zik knew what Ziff was thinking, and he turned to answer his question before he had asked it.
But should we risk it? I do not know, which is why I was about to ask.
Tezar and the wheelman Tanner stood next to the two. The latter looked from Zik to Ziff in confusion.
What do you mean, sirs?
Tezar answered for them.
They're wondering if it's better to land than to continue our search at sea.
Zik turned to Tezar.
How's the repaired rudder?
It's holding up okay.
Zik and Ziff looked at one another, then walked to the cabin.
We will decide our next course of action.
Tezar and Tanner were left alone. Ziff and Zik once again sat at the table.
We need to think this through. We have no idea where Martin and his escaped slaves are, but we can assume he's trying to get somewhere.
Zik thought about that for a moment.
The reason he was sentenced to death was he tried to protect one of the Regent's concubines, who happened to be his daughter. He would not want to abandon his daughter. Then why did he leave? That's the question. I'd imagine someone like him dying valiantly because he did not wish to leave his brood.
They pondered for a moment.
Perhaps he is wiser than we think? It would explain how he has evaded us thus far. So he left to save himself, though with no less motivation to save his daughter. That would mean he's going back to Frostblight with an army of escaped slaves, and we have no idea where he is now.
Both brothers were silent again. Not because they were straining their intellect, no, but because they were contemplating the consequences of this entire situation. Zik sighed.
If this is true, we must return also. We would face a certain wrath. We could intercept him on the way back. If he slipped through our grasp, there would be little to oppose him, assuming the slaves join his cause. Aye, a lot to gamble on. And as fate would have it, it falls on us to roll the bones.
Zik and Ziff once again fell silent. Pale, Bronze, and Martin sat on the sand, satiating their hunger with the fruits still. Rita, Harimau, and Garth had moved on to explore the hills, so the three were alone. Bronze leaned back and burped.
Oh, man.
That must have been the most satisfying meal I've ever had, even if it was just fruits.
Martin shoved another into his mouth.
Second for me.
Pill had satisfied his rather small stomach earlier and was whipping one of the empty branches around absent-mindedly.
Oh? What's the first?
Martin smiled at the memory.
Kier, she made a cake once. It tasted like, well, it was the best thing I've ever eaten. It was quite filling. Miri ate so much, she was sick for days.
Bronze smiled.
My dad used to cook for us, but he was never any good. Oh, Pill.
Yeah?
You have yet to tell me about him. My father.
Oh! I suppose I'll do that now then. What would you like to know?
I don't know. How about when you first met him?
When I first met him, the world was at peace. I was buying supplies in a small town, the name of which escapes me. You were in a bundle on his back, and he was also buying supplies.
Martin interjected.
Hold on a moment. How old are you, Pill?
I am 50 years old.
Really? You're quite spry for an old man.
Well, yes, I suppose. I used to have color in my fur, you know. Then it went all snowy, and women stopped coming round to call.
Bronze and Martin chuckled. Pill frowned.
That wasn't a joke.
Bronze waved his paw.
Never mind. Get on with it.
Fine. This was 20 years ago when I was still working out my theory of everything. I got nowhere with that one, let me tell you. Anyway, your father was buying some very interesting things, so I struck up a conversation with him.
What was he like?
A little like me, actually, except slow, methodical, and built like a rock. He was a man of science, and he told me he was traveling the land in search of great treasures of knowledge or some such nonsense. Well, we talked and talked about this and that. He was a mild-mannered man, always nodding along at things I would say, never getting mad when I disagreed with him. I invited you two to my home. You slept through the whole thing.
What did you do? More talking?
Yes and no. We had lunch, and he showed me a few alchemical methods I didn't know. I let him take some of my strong acids, and we parted ways. I learned a lot from him. Nice guy.
Bronze was slightly disappointed.
I thought there would be more.
But there is. He left his home again, correct?
Yes, for the last time.
I met him once more on that fateful journey. This episode is not as nice.
Okay.
The next time I met your father, he was very sick. He told me it was a plague that had taken your mother and a few others in town. Not wanting to spread the sickness to you, he gave you to some townsfolk and left to find a cure. He did not want to leave you alone, Bronze. He was trying to save himself so you wouldn't be.
Bronze was speechless. Martin sniffed.
Jafreza have mercy.
Go on, Pill.
He was looking for a cure in the far north and stopped to see me on his way. I'm immune to the disease, being feline, so I accompanied him for a while. He had word of an elixir to be made of high mountain flowers. Silver stars, the flowers were called. One night, we sat down next to the fire.
Brahm and Pill sat around the campfire, the glow of the coals just starting to brighten, as the kindling was quickly swallowed in flame. Brahm coughed and shivered, pulling his cloak around himself tightly.
What a terrible night for this curse.
Isn't any night, my friend?
It is indeed true, Pill. I'll rid myself of it soon enough.
His speech was overtaken by a fit of spasms. Pill could do nothing to ease his pain, and simply began preparing food for him.
That you will. That you will. How is the little one?
Brahm sat for a moment, recovering.
He was strong and healthy last I laid my eyes on him. I wish to have him here now, if I knew he would not contract my disease.
Pill nodded. There was a silence as the food was cooked and consumed. After the meal, Pill addressed a concern that had been on his mind.
What if we don't make it?
You mean, what if I don't make it?
Well, yes.
If I don't make it, I want you to bury me deep. I want you to open my eyes before you do. I want you to not dwell on my demise. To live your life without the pain of loss. I want you to tell my son.
He went into another abrupt fit of spasms. Pill stroked his head comfortingly, and eventually Brahm returned to normal.
Damn. I bit my tongue.
Pill chuckled.
I'll be sure to let him know just how much it hurt.
Brom laughed heartily, and Pill marveled at how he could keep his good humor in such dire circumstances. He shook his head as Brom continued.
Where was I? Oh, yes, of course. I'd want you to tell my son I love him, from wherever I'll go if I die. I'd also tell him to clean his room.
He laughed again.
In all seriousness, there's a lot I'd like to tell Bronze that I'd never get to. Even if I live out the fullest life possible. Listen, the wandering blood runs in his veins. He'll come looking for me if I do not return. Tell him, if you ever meet him out in the world, that his journey is over.
Brom's face lit up after he finished his somewhat morbid speech.
But that day will not come. I'll shrug this thing off like I have many injuries before.
Pill nodded, lying down to sleep.
Aye, friend.
Brom lay down also.
I'll try not to wake you during the night.
Heh, it's no trouble. Good night.
Good night.
You're joking, right?
Flasu shook his head.
No, it's not a word I've heard before. What does it mean?
A couple farmers scratched their heads and began speculating. Elder Laurel began to look somewhat uneasy, but remained silent. Kethresh decided to humor the man.
It means you're different than us. You must at least see we're different.
He nodded.
Well, yes, but what about them? Their ears are round, not pointy. And their snouts are short, like mine. Are they not felines too?
Cull scoffed.
If I was a feline, I'd off myself.
Yez jumped from Flasu's back and walked towards Cull.
Is it bad to be a feline?
Cull looked down at the child and found she could not answer. Elder Laurel broke the moment by walking into the middle of everything.
I think it's time we sat down and discussed this without weapons. Come, we'll have our noonday meal together and talk peacefully.
None of the gathered escaped slaves budged. Kethresh turned to them.
Go back and tell everyone to stop eating and hunting, and that those grooves of fruit belong to somebody.
The elder looked at Civi.
Tell them we are good felines. We mean your kind, no harm at all.
Flasu looked at the elder with shock.
Elder, do you know something we don't?
I'll explain after we've eaten.
He turned to Kethresh.
How many more of you are there?
About 200.
The elder raised an eyebrow.
Oh my, that is a lot of dinner guests.
He looked over his shoulder at the farmers.
Get cooking, children. I want a feast for these people.
The farmers chattered excitedly. The elder followed them at a leisurely pace.
Come along, then. There's plenty to explain to both of you.
Yez tugged on the elder's robe.
Just tell us now!
All in good time.
Kethresh followed them, then looked at the rest, who were awkwardly standing around.
Get to it! Cole, Civi, you two come with me. Leave the bows.